She just wanted to get to the hospital that morning, but a ride from a stranger changed her life. What started in the rain became a family. Hello, my friends. Before we begin this amazing story, please leave a comment indicating where you're watching from, okay? And remember to like and subscribe to the channel. The Philadelphia sky held a melancholic silence that autumn morning. The sun, shy behind thick clouds, barely managed to filter its light through the tall buildings of a Fishtown neighborhood, where old windows guarded the quiet stories of families struggling to keep their routines going. Inside a small apartment on the third floor, the smell of toast warming on a griddle mixed with that of freshly brewed coffee. Elena Ramirez, 32, sat at the scratched formica table, mechanically buttering her toast, as if performing a daily choreography with no room for improvisation. Her dark, deep eyes always seemed tired, as if they slept less than her body required. She wore her white nurse's uniform under an old navy blue coat, her brown hair pulled back in a hurried bun. Every detail of her appearance told a piece of the story of a woman who hadn't had time to be young for very long. Leo, her 8-year-old son, emerged from the small living room that also served as his bedroom, backpack slung over his shoulders, his eyes still sleepy. "Mom, do you think it's going to rain a lot today?" His voice had a sweet, almost guilty tone, as if the weather were his. Responsibility. Elena looked up, smiled gently, and ruffled the boy's dark hair. "I think so, sweetie. But we've faced worse rain. Remember when the roof leaked right onto your math homework?" Leo chuckled softly, and for an instant, the apartment felt lighter. But reality offered no respite. An overdue utility bill on the refrigerator, the insistent dripping of the faucet, and her phone alarm announcing it was time to rush to another shift. Elena swallowed the rest of her toast with a hurried gulp of lukewarm coffee and grabbed her bag. "Abuela is picking you up today, okay? Mommy's going to be late at the hospital." Leo nodded and headed out first, while she turned off the kitchen light, leaving behind the scent of toast and coffee like a brief memory of comfort. Outside, the air was damp, charged with the electricity that always preceded thunderstorms. Elena quickened her pace as she saw the sky darkening further. She reached the building's small parking lot and let out a hopeful sigh at the sight of her car, an old faded beige sedan with a dent on the side she called her battle scar. When she turned the key, the engine groaned once, twice, and then nothing. Just a stubborn silence, the kind that refuses to help. "No, not now, please," she murmured, her forehead resting against the steering wheel. She tried again. The car coughed and died completely. The rain began to fall, first timidly, then insistently. Eleanor got out, opened the hood, even without understanding much about mechanics, as if she could convince the engine with a pleading look. Water ran down her neck, her soaked uniform clung to her body, and the feeling of defeat came as a wet weight. "If I miss this shift, I don't know how I'll pay the bills," she whispered through gritted teeth as the rain turned into a torrent. It was at that moment, between a tear disguised as rain and a desperate attempt to dry her eyes with the back of her hand, that a black car with tinted windows approached. Silently. It stopped a few feet away, just observing. The driver's side window lowered slowly, revealing a man with a sober expression, sharp features, and a gaze that seemed to carry more winters than springs. Daniel Foster, 39, CEO of one of the largest tech companies in North America, wasn't the type of man who usually intervened in strangers' lives. But there was something about the scene, the drenched woman, the restrained desperation, the way she protected her pride even in chaos, that provoked a gentle discomfort, like an old memory that couldn't be ignored. He got out of the car calmly. His dark coat covered his tall, elegant frame, and the umbrella he opened seemed an almost intimate gesture of generosity. "Excuse me, can I help in any way?" he said, his voice deep and kind, like someone expecting nothing in return. Elena hesitated for a moment before answering the stranger. Rain streamed down her forehead, Her hair stuck to her neck, and her hands trembled not just from the cold, but from an instinct life had taught her never trust easily. Still, there was something about this man, perhaps his sincere tone or the restrained gesture of respect in keeping his distance, that softened her initial suspicion. "My car died, and I need to be at the hospital in 20 minutes, she said, pulling her coat tighter around her. Daniel nodded slowly, as if respecting her urgency without pressing. "I'm heading in that direction. I can drop you at the door," he offered. Holding the umbrella towards her, Eleanor, caught between pride and necessity, sighed. She didn't have time for internal debates. "Okay, but just to the hospital." He smiled discreetly and escorted her to his car with slow steps, as if trying not to startle a wounded bird. As soon as she got into the vehicle, the contrast struck her. The pleasant warmth, the silent dashboard, the soft leather beneath her, it was like stepping through a portal into a world that wasn't hers. Elena pressed her knees together and kept her hands in her lap, trying to seem smaller than she was, as if her presence might soil the place. Daniel said nothing for a few minutes. He just drove attentively, his eyes focused on the wet avenue, while the city seemed suspended in the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers. She observed him out of the corner of her eye, the slight stubble, the strong jawline, the precisely cut dark suit jacket. He was clearly a man accustomed to control. "Sorry about the mess. I don't even know your name," she murmured, still tense. Daniel Foster," he replied, and when she showed no sign of recognition, he smiled. For the first time in a long time, he was just Daniel, not the CEO plastered on magazine covers. Elena didn't know why that bothered her. Maybe it was the comfortable silence between them, or the fact that he didn't try to make unnecessary small talk. He just respected her presence. As they neared the hospital, she pointed, "You can let me out at that corner, please." Daniel complied without question, but before she got out, he pulled something from the center console, a small, still packaged umbrella. "You'll need this later, and good luck today." She took it hesitantly. "Thank you. Really, you saved me today." He just nodded with a calm look, and before she closed the door, he said in an almost inaudible tone, "Take care of yourself too." Eleanor stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, watching the car disappear among the others. The new umbrella still in her hand, her uniform still damp, but her chest a little warmer than before. The day continued at a frantic pace inside the hospital. Elena barely had time to think about the stranger in the black car, between one medication and another, between an anxious patient and a desperate family member. But at the end of her shift, as she tiredly left through the side door and walked to where her car had been left, the world stopped for a second. The beige sedan was there, clean, with a note carefully folded under the windshield wiper. She looked around as if expecting to see him watching from some corner. With trembling fingers, she opened the paper. "Thank you for taking care of others. Now take care of yourself too. D." Elena felt a lump in her throat. The engine, when she turned the key, started without hesitation. Someone had fixed it, and she knew exactly who it had been. It could only have been him. But why? She whispered, her eyes welling up. For the first time in a long time, someone had done something for her without wanting anything in return. 3 days passed since the note. Elena still didn't know how she felt. Between gratitude and unease, a seed had been planted deep in her chest. A curiosity not born from the man's wealth, but from his respectful silence, his discreet gestures, the way he seemed to see her beyond the uniform. It was on a grey Tuesday, in the small park opposite the hospital, that she saw him again. She was sitting on a bench, with a whole wheat sandwich and juice in a thermos, having a quick lunch between shifts, when she recognized him crossing the sidewalk. Daniel was dressed less formally, a linen shirt with rolled-up sleeves, dark pants, and a calm expression. "Good morning, Nurse Ramirez," he said with a half-smile. She tried to contain her surprise, but he quickly added, sitting at a respectful distance, Relax. I'm not following you. I have a meeting with the hospital board. I saw you here. Thought I'd say hi. She looked at him, suspicious, unsure whether to smile or frown. You fixed my car? He pretended to think. Let's just say I did a small kindness. No one should start their day drenched and with a broken-down engine. Eleanor sighed, her gaze still firm. I don't know what you expect from this, Mr. Foster, but I don't usually accept favors. He smiled, and there was something in that smile, neither arrogance nor irony, just a light, melancholic air that disarmed her. I don't expect anything. It's just that seeing you there that day reminded me of someone. The sentence hung in the air like cold smoke. For a moment, Elena didn't reply. Then she offered half her sandwich. It's tuna with tomato, not gourmet, but it's honest. He accepted with a solemn gesture, as if receiving an invitation to share not just a snack, but a bit of truth. The conversation that followed was slow, unhurried by any need to prove anything. Daniel mentioned he had lost his mother 3 years ago after a long hospital stay. She spent 6 months in bed. I saw the effort of the nurses. I saw how a word could change her day. Since then, I can't see this job as something simple anymore. It's a calling. Eleanor listened attentively, not out of curiosity, but because she felt he was speaking from the soul. We try to do our best with what little we have, she replied, looking at her worn sneakers, but sometimes it's hard to remember why. Daniel watched her in silence for a few seconds and said something she never expected to hear. You were the first person who treated me like a human being in a very long time. The words resonated deeply. They weren't a compliment, but a mirror. And Eleanor, for an instant, felt she also needed to be heard. In the following days, that memory became insistent. Elena didn't tell her colleagues, but sometimes she found herself looking out the hospital window towards the park, as if waiting for an answer without knowing if she'd asked a question. Then, the following Saturday, something happened. It was Leo's birthday. The party was simple, in her abuela's cramped living room, with colorful balloons taped to the walls and a homemade chocolate cake in the center of the table. The boy was radiant, and Elena tried not to think about the tight budget, only about the children's laughter. When someone knocked on the door, she thought it was another schoolmate. But there, standing in the building's hallway with a gift in hand and a discreet smile, was Daniel. I promised I'd bring a little something for the birthday boy. I hope I'm not intruding. Elena froze for an instant. The voices behind her ceased. The world fell silent. And before she could say anything, Leo came running. Are you the man with the new umbrella? Daniel knelt to the boy's level. That's me. Happy birthday, champ. Daniel's presence at that simple party stirred something in Elena she couldn't explain. It wasn't just surprise, it was bewilderment. This man, accustomed to dinners at five-star hotels and meetings with shareholders, was there, sitting on an old sofa, surrounded by noisy children and balloons tied to mismatched chairs, patiently listening to every word Leo said about dinosaurs and superheroes. Daniel wasn't trying to be friendly. He simply was. He listened with a rare attention, as if the boy were a diplomat explaining international treaties. And this one is Pizzasaurus Rex. I made him up, Leo said, holding up a misshapen toy. Daniel let out a genuine laugh. Brilliant! That needs a patent urgently. Eleanor, standing by the door, watched in silence. The image of herself standing there looking at this man in the middle of her humble living room seemed like something out of another book, as if someone had turned the wrong page and by mistake mixed two entirely different worlds, colliding not in conflict, but in delicate harmony. After the party, when the guests had left and Leo was asleep, clutching his new plush dinosaur, Elena served Daniel a cup of tea on the small balcony. They sat side by side, without the immediate need to speak. The Philadelphia night brought a gentle chill, and the urban silence mingled with the distant sound of an old radio from a neighboring apartment. You didn't have to come, she said, looking at the cup in her hands. Daniel turned to her, his gaze calm. but I wanted to. The answer hung in the air with a soft weight. Leo really liked you, but don't get your hopes up. He likes people. Easily. He's been disappointed too early in life. Daniel nodded without romanticizing the pain. I didn't come to fill any space. I just thought an amazing kid deserved an amazing day. Elena looked at him for a moment. And me? What do you think I deserve? Daniel didn't answer right away. He just looked up at the cloudy sky and said, maybe someone who also listens when you're silent. The first kiss didn't happen that night, nor the next day, but it came on an ordinary day with a clear sky and a light breeze. Elena was leaving the local movie theater with Daniel and Leo. They had seen an old classic, one of those that used to be shown with slightly faded picture quality, but still drew laughs. Leo was running ahead, balancing on the curb, when Daniel stopped and gently took Elena's arm. You take my breath away sometimes, not because of your strength, but the way you carry everything so quietly. She frowned, trying to understand. You don't know what it's like to carry the world alone. Daniel smiled sadly. No, but I know what it's like to lose the one who made the world worthwhile. It was then that she moved closer. The kiss was short, sincere, like two worlds trying to find each other amidst the chaos. No grand soundtrack, just the sound of Leo shouting in the background, "Look, Mom, I'm walking on one leg." In the following days, their routine began to take on softer contours. Daniel appeared frequently, sometimes with a box of warm pretzels from a street vendor, other times just with the willingness to sit on the sofa and watch a cartoon with Leo. Elena was surprised by the naturalness of their encounters. There was no ostentation, no promises, no grand gestures. There was the simple, him washing the dishes after dinner or asking Leo how school had been. He really listens. Daddy didn't do that, the boy commented one night before bed. Elena smiled, but felt a tightness in her chest. That's what scared her, how this peace felt too good to last, as if it would be snatched away with the next breath. At night, lying in bed, she remembered the words Daniel had said about his mother. She taught me that love isn't a spectacle, it's care. And for the first time in years, Elena began to wonder if, perhaps, she deserved to be cared for too. It was an evening far too elegant for Elena's standards, but she disguised it as best she could. The navy blue dress borrowed from her sister-in-law was tight on her shoulders, and her low-heeled shoes seemed to make more noise than necessary on the marble floor. Daniel had invited her to a charity event for Innovatech Solutions, something about donations to hospitals and digitizing medical records. But what Elena felt, as she held a glass of sparkling water she barely touched, was a silent displacement. The glass walls of the ballroom, the warm lights, the overly tall floral arrangements, everything seemed designed to remind her she didn't belong there. You look beautiful, Daniel whispered in her ear as he greeted a hospital director. She smiled outwardly. Inside, she felt like a child on an improvised stage, trying to remember lines from a play she hadn't memorized. It was when Daniel stepped away to speak with a German investor that the voice emerged, low and cutting. You're the nurse from City General, aren't you? Elena turned slowly. The woman speaking was tall, blonde, dressed in a tailored suit and a fine pearl necklace. Victoria Sterling, an Innovatech board member and one of the company's most influential figures. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were assessing. Daniel has a huge heart, likes to save people. He did it with Mariana too, an artist from a rough neighborhood, an interesting phase. Elena gripped her glass tighter. I'm not a phase. Victoria smirked as if lamenting a predictable future. Just be careful not to confuse kindness with love. He's generous, but he has trouble staying. Elena didn't reply. She just turned and walked towards the outdoor terrace, where the cold air felt fairer than that polished, superficial ballroom. Sitting alone on the parapet, her fingers trembling, Elena tried to control the mixture of shame, anger, and fear. She had never asked for any of this, never sought a spotlight, nor charity disguised as romance. When Daniel found her minutes later, she was still there, silent, looking out at the city as if searching for a place where she fit. "I was looking for you," he said, leaning against the glass. She took a deep breath. "Answer me honestly. Am I just another pretty story you like to tell?" Daniel frowned. "What are you saying?" She looked him in the eyes. "Did you fix me like you fixed my car? Are you going to get me running and then disappear?" Daniel approached slowly. "You're the only real thing I've had since my mother died." But insecurity had already settled in Elena like a hot coal, silent but burning. In the following days, she distanced herself. She answered Daniel's messages with short replies, avoided invitations, declined visits. Daniel respected her silence but didn't disappear. He sent small signals, a bag with Leo's favorite juice, a book of poetry with a simple dedication, "For when you need to breathe." Elena read them, cried alone, but didn't yield. She needed to understand if this man truly wanted the whole woman she was, with her past, her cracks, and her mess. "You're not a project, Elena. You're the home I didn't know I needed." Those words echoed in her mind. But doubt spoke loudly. In her mother's cramped living room, she folded Leo's clothes, but her heart was on the balcony of that penthouse where, for a moment, she had felt she might deserve more than just survival. That overcast Wednesday, Elena was finishing hanging the last piece of laundry on the line when she heard the intercom buzz. Her heart quickened even before she saw the name on the screen. She hesitated, took a deep breath, and answered. "It's me," said the deep voice on the other end, laden with something she couldn't yet name, perhaps regret, perhaps longing. "Can I come up for just 5 minutes?" She almost said no, almost hung up. But the longing, that silent betrayer, won. Minutes later, Daniel stood at her worn wooden door, in his dark coat, a crumpled paper bag in his hands. He brought no flowers, no gifts. He brought tired eyes and a lack of defenses. "I didn't come to explain, I came to expose myself," he said, entering slowly, as if treading on sacred ground. They sat facing each other, the wooden table between them like an unstable bridge. Elena expected a justification. Instead, Daniel spoke of his mother. Her name was Beatrice. She was strong, but the cancer was crueler than any contract I've ever signed. His voice faltered, but he didn't try to hide it. "For months, I watched the world stop while she fought the pain alone. And it was a nurse, a woman like you, who held her hand at the end. I never forgot that." He paused for a moment, his eyes welling up. "Since then, I started donating, helping hospitals, funding projects. But I've never been as close to that memory as when I saw you, in the rain, trying to get your car to work." Elena didn't blink. She just listened. "You're not a project, Elena. You're the home I didn't know I needed." That sentence broke something inside her. Her pride, perhaps, or her fear, or the wall she had built for so many years between herself and any promise of permanence. Elena rested her elbows on the table and lowered her eyes. "I've lived my whole life trying not to depend on anyone, because whoever leaves always takes a part of you. My ex-husband took my sleep, my father, my trust. And you gave me something too good not to hurt afterward." Daniel reached his hand across the table, not to touch, but just to be there. "I don't know how it will be, I'm scared too. But I'd rather build something with fear than live with nothing, with certainty." The sentence, spoken with disarming honesty, made Elena take a deep breath. "I'm scared, Daniel, but I think I want to try." He let out a restrained laugh, as if he hadn't expected to hear that, as if that single sentence had been worth all the previous silences. They stayed there a while longer, in no hurry to end the conversation, like two castaways who finally spot land. Before leaving, Daniel handed her the bag he had brought. Inside was a photo album, but it wasn't his. It was Leo's, with pictures Elena had never seen. The boy, Smiling in the park, running at the movies, reading a book on the sofa. I asked your mother's permission to take these photos. It was selfish. I just wanted to remember what it was like to be near you both. She flipped through it, moved. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was a silent request to stay. And in Daniel's eyes, there was no rush, only the serene hope of someone willing to start over. The morning after their reunion, Eleanor woke with something new pulsing in her chest. It wasn't joy, nor certainty, but there was peace, an internal truce she hadn't felt in years. Leo was still asleep when she went to the balcony and saw, through the slats of the blinds, the note pinned to the gate with a clothespin. It was from Daniel. Today, 3 p.m., at the Innovatech Foundation. I want to show you a project. No obligations, just come. Elena hesitated for a moment, but there was a tone in that message, not of invitation, but of trust, that moved her. Arriving at the mirrored glass building in downtown Philadelphia, she felt out of place again, as if her worn flats were screaming on the marble floor. But Daniel met her even before the reception, as if he had been waiting for her with his heart in his hands. "I'm glad you came," he said, and his smile was the same as that day in the rain, real, simple, no spectacle. He led her to a small, cozy presentation room with posters on the walls showing prototypes of medical triage apps, platforms for nurse training, and remote care programs. "This is the project we're taking to public hospitals in the next 2 years, but we don't just want technology. We want people with heart and experience to guide this from the ground up. And I thought of you." Eleanor's eyes widened, almost laughing. "Daniel, I'm not a tech manager. I'm a nurse, and not even one of the youngest." He looked at her with firmness and tenderness. "You're the most capable I know. You have vision, you have experience, and you know better than anyone where the pain begins and where care needs to reach." That disarmed her more than any kiss. It was the first time someone had invited her not just to a romance, but to a future built side by side. They spent the afternoon discussing the project details, how her experience could translate real needs into practical solutions. Daniel listened as he listened to Leo, with genuine interest, with a thirst to learn. "This isn't just a job," he said at one point. "It's because I truly believe you're the best person for this." Eleanor moved, looked at their reflection in the room's glass. A man and a woman from different worlds, but with the same wound and the same desire to make sense of it. "If it's to do something real, then I'm in. But I want to start slow. No easy promises." Daniel smiled. "Slow is already more than I hoped for." In the days that followed, their lives began to change in small details. But it was in these minutiae that the transformation gained strength. Daniel started picking up Elena and Leo from the hospital sometimes, with warm pastries balanced in one hand and reports in the other. Leo, in turn, would ask, "When are we going to work with Daddy Daniel?" Without noticing, he was innocently sketching the outline of something more steadfast than any contract. Elena, who used to sleep poorly and dream little, now had nights where she daydreamed, looking at the ceiling and wondering how she had let life become so grey for so long. Now, even with the challenges, there was color. There were plans, there were choices made without rush, but with truth. It was a Sunday with a clear Philadelphia sky, one of those days when the air seems lighter and the city less hurried. Daniel had sent a simple invitation. Lunch at the penthouse. Just the 3 of us. Eleanor, even after everything, still felt a knot in her stomach at the thought of crossing that threshold. It wasn't about the place. It was about what it represented. A space that once would have seemed unattainable now awaited her with open doors. They went up together in the mirrored elevator, Elena holding Leo's hand, who smiled and swayed his shoulders to the rhythm of a little tune he hummed softly. When the door opened, she felt a breath of memory and novelty. The same elegant environment as before, but now with Leo's drawings taped to the refrigerator, toys discreetly tucked in a corner of the living room, and the aroma of home-cooked food in the air. It was as if the space had ceased to be a showcase and had become a home. The table was set with delicate details, simple cloth napkins, fresh juice made by Daniel, and a chocolate cake in the center, the recipe Elena had casually mentioned in one of their first conversations. I thought we could create new memories, on top of the old ones. She smiled, touched. Leo ran to explore the balcony, and Daniel took advantage of the momentary privacy to pull a small, light velvet box from his pocket. "Relax. It's not a ring," he said, with a nervous smile. When he opened it, there was a necklace, simple, elegant, with 3 intertwined stones. One for you, one for Leo, and one for me. It's not about a promise. It's about permanence. Elena brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes welling up without disguise. It was a symbol, a gesture, a silent request to continue, together, without rush, without facade. After lunch, they sat on the balcony, the 3 of them together, lulled by the light breeze rustling through the carefully arranged plants. In large pots, Leo was on Daniel's lap, showing him drawings on a tablet, and Elena watched the scene as if witnessing an everyday miracle. There was no grandeur, but there was truth. "Do you remember the rain?" Daniel asked, without taking his eyes off the drawing. Elena smiled. "I remember I just wanted to get to the hospital, and I ended up coming home." He looked at her seriously. "That day changed everything. I was a man full of walls, and you opened a window." They were silent for a few seconds, just feeling the moment, as if they no longer needed to run, as if life finally had aligned with the rhythm of the heart. Later that afternoon, while they were clearing the dishes and Leo was lying on the sofa with a thin blanket, Eleanor touched the smooth surface of the necklace on her neck. Daniel, noticing the gesture, approached gently. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know that, for the first time, I'm not afraid to try." Eleanor hugged him, resting her head on his chest. "We're already a family, not by convention but by choice." And there, in the comfortable silence that only those who recognize each other share, they both understood that love sometimes doesn't arrive with promises or fireworks. It arrives with care, permanence, and a necklace with 3 stones that carried the light weight of a new story. It was a grey, stuffy Tuesday, one of those days when the air seems to announce a tragedy before it even happens. Elena was preparing a simple pasta dish with what little she had in the pantry, while Leo drew, listening to soft music on the kitchen radio. The phone rang. It wasn't Daniel's usual ringtone. It was a strange number, a direct call from a hospital. Elena answered with an icy premonition invading her chest. On the other end, a professional, almost cold voice. "Ms. Ramirez, Daniel Foster was admitted to the emergency room a short while ago. He was in a serious car accident on the Schuylkill Expressway. He's in surgery right now." The world went dark, though it was still daytime. "No, no," she murmured, dropping the wooden spoon on the floor. Leo ran to her side. "Mom, what's wrong?" She didn't know what to say. She just hugged him tightly, her eyes wide open, as if staring at a waking nightmare. The cab took 7 minutes to arrive, but to Elena, it felt like 70. The traffic was a cruel enemy at that hour. Slow cars, indifferent traffic lights, people on the sidewalks living as if nothing had happened. When she finally walked through the doors of City General Hospital, her feet seemed to float, directionless. In the corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoed like hammer blows. "I'm Elena Ramirez. I received a call. Daniel Foster." The receptionist confirmed with a grave nod and directed her to a private waiting room. A doctor in a white coat came to meet her shortly after, his expression serious. He underwent surgery to stop internal bleeding. He had fractured ribs, a lung injury, and a suspected cervical fracture. The team did everything they could. Now we have to wait. Eleanor sat down slowly, as if her body no longer obeyed. She crossed her arms over her stomach, trying to hold back a sob that wouldn't come. Only silence, only fear. A fear so dense it left her breathless. 2 hours later, they allowed her to see him for the first time, still unconscious, surrounded by tubes, machines beeping in disjointed rhythms. Daniel's face, always so confident, was now marked by deep scratches, bruises descending from his jaw to his collarbone, and an oddly fragile expression. Elena approached the bed slowly, as if each step might wake him or hurt him more. She sat in the armchair beside him and took his hand, cold, stiff. "You can't do this to me. Not now," she whispered, as if he could hear her from the other side of the world. "Not after everything. Not after you taught me to dream again." The nurse on duty came in to adjust the monitor levels, but Elena didn't move. She wasn't the professional at that moment. She was just a woman about to lose the man she loved, and she understood with cutting clarity that true love hurts even when it still exists, especially when it's on the verge of ending. Outside, night fell. Leo was with his abuela, who had picked him up from school and on the phone tried to hide the tremor in her voice so as not to alarm her grandson. He asked about him, said he was going to show Daniel a drawing. Elena smiled inwardly, her eyes welling up. "Keep that drawing. He'll still see it." She stayed there well into the night, never leaving his side. She watched every variation in his heart rate, as if it were a conversation in code. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her fingers intertwined with his. "You once said you didn't know what the future held, but that you weren't afraid to try anymore. So try, Daniel. For me, for Leo, for us." And there, alone in that silent room, Elena felt that love wasn't just about presence. It was also about endurance. The following days were a labyrinth of uncertainties. Daniel spent 4 days sedated, and Elena received each new medical update as if it were a verdict on her own life. When his eyes finally opened, she was there, in the same uniform as always, her dark circles deeper, her hair hastily tied back, but her hand still intertwined with his. He blinked slowly, trying to focus his gaze. You're here," he murmured, his voice hoarse, weak, but alive. Elena smiled through tears. "I am. And I haven't left for a single day." Daniel tried to move, but groaned in pain. She placed her hand on his chest. "Easy. We have time now." He nodded, and in that tired gesture there was more love than in all the words they had ever exchanged. Recovery was slow. Daniel lost weight, mobility, and patience. Elena was present at every step. She was the one who adjusted his bed, fed him small spoonfuls, calmed him on nights when pain kept him from sleeping. But it wasn't just physical care. It was emotional. She read to him aloud, told him stories from Leo's childhood, talked about patients at the hospital, her mother's recipes, anything to keep him anchored. "You're going to get through this, Daniel, but you'll come out of it different. You'll come out of it ours." He cried one night, his face turned to the window, unable to hide his vulnerability. "I've always been afraid of depending on someone, and now you're my foundation." Elena gently held his face. "And you're my courage." Leo also visited the hospital with his childlike curiosity and uncomplicated love. "I drew a picture of you with a superhero cape. Want to see?" he said one afternoon, placing the folded paper on his stepfather's chest. Daniel laughed, still in pain. "And what's my superpower?" Leo answered seriously. "You fell out of the car and didn't die, and you still have Mom." The boy sat on the edge of the bed and took the hand of the man he now called family, with the naturalness of someone who understands that love doesn't need blood, only presence. Elena, watching the scene, felt her heart tighten. For the first time since the accident, she was sure that everything they had faced, the fear, the silence, the pain, had served to strengthen what truly mattered: being together. When Daniel managed to take his first steps with the help of a walker, the medical team applauded. But it was Elena's restrained smile he sought first. She was there, at the doorway of the room, arms crossed, eyes misty. "I'm not very good with small victories, but this one I'll celebrate for the rest of my life," she said, and he laughed. You'll still see me chasing Leo through the park." What began with a gesture of solidarity in the rain was now a story of resilience, woven into every detail of daily life. And in that phase of recovery, between bandages and physical therapy, Elena had no doubt. It was no longer about starting over. It was about building, together. Time passed like someone learning to walk. Slowly, sometimes stumbling, but steadily. 3 months out of the hospital, Daniel could already walk more freely. He gradually returned to work, now at a different pace. Fewer meetings and more visits to the hospital project, always alongside Elena, who had become not only his life partner, but also his professional ally. They understood each other with a look. He brought fresh juice to her meetings. She left little affectionate reminder notes in his planner. And on weekends, the three of them, Daniel, Elena, and Leo, filled the city with their silences, laughter, and plans. They no longer needed grand gestures. They were building something that dispensed with spectacle, a real life. It was on a warm spring afternoon that Daniel took her to the same place where it had all begun, the hospital parking lot. "Do you remember the rain?" he asked, holding her hand lightly. Elena looked around, now without the weight of urgency. "I remember. I just wanted not to miss my shift. And I found you." Daniel smiled, and from the inside pocket of his jacket, he took out a small grey linen-lined box. This time, it was a ring. Simple, delicate, with 3 intertwined bands of matte gold. "It took me a while to understand that love isn't one big decision. It's a sum of small choices, and I choose you every day. Marry me." Eleanor covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes full of water. Leo, watching closely with a cup of juice in his hand, exclaimed, "It's about time." The three of them laughed together, and she replied between tears and smiles, "Of course, yes." The wedding was planned calmly, without rush, like everything they had learned to value. But that night, lying together on the penthouse sofa, Elena turned to him and whispered, "Do you realize we survived everything?" Daniel kissed her forehead and replied, "And because of that, we deserve everything." Leo, already half asleep beside them, snuggled between the two and murmured, "Now we have the same last name, right?" Elena smiled, holding the boy close. "Yes, sweetie, but more than that, we have a home." And in that instant, the address, the size of the house, or the bank balance didn't matter. All that mattered was what they had built together day by day, permanence, care, and affection. Weeks later, while organizing old boxes in the closet, Elena found the note he had left on her car at the beginning of their story. "Thank you for taking care of others. Now take care of yourself too. D." She reread it. In silence, her fingers trembling, and walked to the balcony where Daniel was watering a plant with the same care he now took with his own life. "You know that note you left on my windshield?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Of course. I remember every word." She held out the yellowed paper. "That's where it started. And now I understand what it meant." He gently pulled her into an embrace. "Yes, I found you in the rain, but you were the one who saved me." Months later, on a golden afternoon, Elena watched from the window of the new house they now shared. It was a modest building, but full of windows, with rosemary and lavender pots at the entrance, and a rope swing Daniel had installed in the yard for Leo. The walls still smelled of fresh paint, and the sound of the kettle on the stove echoed through the open kitchen. Daniel appeared behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his head resting on her shoulder. "Have you noticed how the sunset lasts longer here?" Elena smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "I think when you're at peace, everything takes longer to pass, even the light." Outside, Leo ran barefoot on the grass, laughing loudly, his t-shirt stained with paint. He was building with pieces of wood, a model of a city of the future where all houses had yards and no one lived alone. That night, during dinner, Leo asked with his mouth full of rice, "Can we say we're a real family now?" Daniel looked at Elena, and they both laughed. tenderly. "What do you think, love?" he asked. Elena looked around, the simple plates on the table, the yellow light warming the kitchen, the smell of food cooked slowly. "I think we already are. Because family, Leo, isn't who starts with us. It's who chooses to stay." The boy chewed slowly, as if also digesting the words, and then replied, "Then I want to stay too. Forever." Daniel reached his arm across the table and held Elena's hand. "And me too." The three of them looked at each other and laughed, as if in that instant they had signed, without paper, an eternal pact. Later, Elena was putting away Leo's clothes and found the 3-stone necklace on his bed. The boy had left it there purposefully, with a crooked, handwritten note. "So Mom never forgets we are 3. She smiled, her eyes welling up, and took the necklace to the porch where Daniel was waiting for her with 2 cups of tea. "I wanted to thank you," she said, putting the necklace on, "for stopping your car that day." Daniel held her face in his hands. "I didn't stop. You're the one who made me stop." And then they kissed, not with urgency, but with the sweetness of those who know that true love is a home built every day, even in the rain.